The Settlers of Catan burst onto the scene in 1995 into an era where interest in gaming had turned toward the latest offerings from Sega and Nintendo, and the brand new PlayStation had entered the scene. Board games had become almost an afterthought during this time, but this interactive island building experience became the first in a new wave of innovative and interesting board games that changed the trajectory of board gaming forever. In the Settlers of Catan, you race with 2 or 3 other players to score 10 points. The bulk of these points are acquired through building settlements and cities, but there are other ways to get these points as well. To build anything, you need the requisite number of resources: wood, brick, wheat, sheep, and ore. You get these resource cards by having a settlement next to a resource when the resource's number is rolled. So choosing where to place settlements requires players to consider both what resources they want as well as which numbers have a higher probability of being rolled when rolling the 2 dice. Settlements earn 1 resource when the number adjacent to the settlement is rolled, and upgrading to cities doubles that number to 2. Players need to build roads to keep their settlements and cities at least a distance of 2 from one another. Players can also build development cards that get them bonuses like extra roads, chasing away the robber, or extra victory points. Speaking of the robber, if a 7 is rolled, all players lose half of their cards if they have more than 7, and the player who rolled 7 moves the robber to any space, blocking players from collecting resources from that space, and they can steal a card from a player with an adjacent settlement or city. Finally, players can trade during their turn, so it is a vitally important mechanic as it helps players to acquire what they need and don't have, but also makes the game very social as players compete to make the best deals with one another. They can trade with one another or trade a bunch of the same type of cards to get one of another type of card at a port. Let's look at some of the expansions for Settlers of Catan. In the 5 to 6 player expansion, it is very similar to the original, except now 2 more players can play, making the island much bigger and giving more options of locations for players to place their settlements and expand. Beyond the player count, the biggest change for this version was the fact that players could build on another player's turn, not just their own. This makes it a lot easier to avoid the risk of a robber catching you with 8 cards in a turn and making you lose half of them. So this does change the gameplay a bit, but otherwise the game plays similarly. Seafarers of Catan changes how the game is played by adding islands that were separate from the originating islands of the players. To get to the islands, players can build ships that work interchangeably with roads, except they can only be placed on water spaces. Roads and ships can both be used on coastal spaces. And the ships make sheep more valuable since ships require wood and sheep to buy. If players reach the extra island or islands in the Seafarers of Catan scenario, they will be rewarded with resources that have high probability die rolls, as well as a chance to build on the gold hex. The gold hex was a new land piece introduced in this version that made it so players could choose any resource that they wanted when the number on the hex was rolled. This would give players a great advantage to get access to the island first. The gameplay in this version changed as players would race to be the first player to get to the smaller islands and access their resources and get bonus points associated with getting to those islands first. The game included different scenarios for the extra islands, which gave some variety to the gameplay in a way that the original lacked. Cities and Knights of Catan added significant changes to the gameplay of Settlers of Catan. In this variation, players used knight tokens to ward off attacking barbarians, so long as the combined strength of all the knights on the board from all the players was higher than the strength of the barbarians. Cities can upgrade with fortresses to protect them, but cities that didn't have the fortress protection would be downgraded to settlements as they would be pillaged if the knights did not fight off the barbarians. This variant is interesting because it requires all of the players to work together to collect the knights necessary to defeat the barbarians and protect the cities of Catan. And if players choose to ignore the barbarians and refuse to build the knights, then everyone on the island is at risk of being raided. The psychology of this game is very different from the others, and the approach of the players to this dilemma can be very telling about their personalities. Additionally, this version has a different system for collecting progress cards, which replace development cards. Buildings within cities can be upgraded with commodities, which give extra bonuses and allow access to progress cards, which give some of the same benefits as the development cards in the original. This variant adds dynamics that make for a deeper game than the original, though I find the bigger the game gets, the more it loses the beauty of simplicity from the original. Cities and Knights is better for the player who felt like the original game was not enough, but for those who enjoyed the original, the additions might actually deter from the original quick, efficient gameplay style. Explorers and Pirates and Traders and Barbarians add new scenarios to the main Catan game that allow for even more variation on the ideas of islands and fighting off the barbarians. They are complementary to the other scenarios. While the games I previously mentioned are the base game with expansions, there have been other variations of the game created over time. Catan Jr. takes the mechanics of Settlers of Catan and simplifies them so it is a more accessible game for kids. One of my favorite aspects of this version is actually that it can be played with 2 people instead of requiring 3. By having all the starting points, resources, and die rolls printed on the board, it simplifies setup and the game can be very quick. Rivals for Catan takes the elements of resources and trade that are present in Catan and turns them into a 2-player card game. This way of playing Catan makes for different gameplay, while still allowing players to have the feeling of playing Settlers of Catan. This is a nice variant for players who would prefer to play card games instead of board games, and would like a game with 2 players as well. Various other scenarios, remakes of the originals, and rule variations have been created over the years that expand upon or modify the core rules and gameplay of Catan and its variants. Catan has delved into popular IP with Game of Thrones Catan and Star Trek Catan, modified the formula a bit with Seafarers of Catan and Rise of the Inca, and worked on aesthetic appeal with the 3D Catan. These variants are all a tribute to the original, the game that started the changes in 1995. Fast forward a few years to see where board gaming has gone since 1995. Ticket to Ride and Carcassonne were released in the early 2000s and combined with Catan to sell millions of copies and make board games popular even among non-board game players. Since then, thousands of new games have been released and the hobby has grown by leaps and bounds in popularity. It is now a hobby that brings in billions of dollars a year, where the games that can be played forever once they're sold. All because of the game where people buy, sell, and trade on an island. So that's it, a comparison of the different versions. If you found this video helpful, hit the like and subscribe button for more board game related content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.